I'm now joined by a panel of leaders in the EdTech industry, and we have had some exchange ahead of the panel on, some topics that, I've kind of set them up on. But I'd like to start with an introduction, and we'll have each of them with an area of focus today. So, on my left is Curtis Barnes. He's the Managing Director for Partner Ecosystems at Pearson. To his left is Jason Palmer, a General Partner at New Markets Venture Partners. And then we have George Moore, who's the CTO of Cengage Learning. And then Melissa Lobel, who's the SVP of Customer Success and Partnerships at Instructure. So anyhow, so panelists, you heard me talk this morning about some changes in the marketplace. I isolated a bit on some of the challenge for the publishing industry in particular as being an example, a kind of a living case study for disruptive innovation as an example. And so with all of these forces that are at work on the industry, and I didn't even mention, like in distribution, the rental model is upon us, and it's yet another thing of a company trying to innovate but also take care of its legacy business. Can you help us understand what it's like to be leading that type of change, Curtis, at Pearson, and how you're managing through this?
Sure. Thanks, Ray. It's really hard to see people, but I see some familiar faces. Before we get into it, just quickly, audience check. How many of you are with institutions in the K-12 space? Post-secondary space? How many of you are with EdTech companies? A lot of EdTech. Any publishers out there? All right. So good mix. So first, Ray, it's just gone swimmingly. It's been easy, pain-free. I joined Pearson 6.5 years ago after doing a stint at Cengage for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was in education, but on the enterprise technology side at Oracle, PeopleSoft, a company called Campus Pipeline back in the day. First, I should just, brief history. When I joined Pearson, just give a couple examples. Higher education, the publishing business was 40% of Pearson's revenue portfolio for education. Pearson at the time was upwards of 50,000 employees and had, divested most of the non-education assets by then. Since then, we've divested virtually everything else: the Financial Times, The Economist, Madame Tussauds Waxworks. And interestingly, to what Ray was talking about, the disruption we've gone through, the higher ed assets are basically 25% of the existing business today. It's a function of two things. Certainly, we've seen a pretty specific decline in that business, and I'll talk to some of the issues there. But also the growth in other parts of Pearson and the new engines that we've put online to drive revenue for the business. I could answer this, it would take hours to really answer it thoroughly. So I'm going to focus on kind of 4 factors or trends that are clearly evident. First and foremost, this technology, the use of technology, as Tom articulated earlier, for the current generation of learner, the Gen Z, it's not transformative. It just is, right? It's part of their daily life. And it has profound implications in how we need to think about productization and how quickly we bring new product to market. And I'll spend some more time on that. Second, technology, this has been true for the last couple of years, but we, as deployers of technology, as in the kind of the faculty and teacher side of things, the way we deploy technology has moved from being about efficiency and increasingly toward efficacy and outcomes orientation. Through this whole period, the power of the consumer has increased dramatically. If you map, some of you have probably seen this, if you map textbook prices and tuition prices for colleges, pretty interesting trend from the 70s to kind of the 2000s. Prices were doubling every 3 to 4 years, right? That trend is certainly broken, but it's led to a backlash. Obviously, it's on the national agenda. Both the debt, the actual cost, but through that, the rising power of the end consumer, the way students, learners want to pay for and how they acquire and use education assets has gone through a profound transformation. And then finally, this trend that we have to think about, the 100-year career, people read that yet? Pay attention to it. It's a bit of hyperbole right now, but the reality is careers are going to get longer. The lifespans are already getting longer. And there's an issue there around how we think about the consumption of learning and the credentialing. And does your credential really stop when you're 24 or 30 years old, depending on kind of how far you've gone? Or is there a change there? So let's go back to that. So technology is normalized. Technology just is. Our products have to live in the real world. They have to be available to the learner when the learner wants it in the format, the modality that they expect. The Gen Z population, I won't go deep into the, kind of the research we've done and others have done, but they use this differently. They're very capable of saying, you know what, I got to learn a new skill. I want to know how to do something. I'll go to YouTube and learn it, right? Or find some other resource. We also know that their trend toward online, strictly online, is not a linear path. They're actually reverting back. They like the social interaction. And they have very high expectations about engagement. So that means, and so our response to that, things have to be chunkier. Big, thick textbooks have gone out the window. The assets have to be more engaging. And, examples are, and I don't want to turn this into a Pearson commercial, but the examples are products like Revel, like MindTap, at Cengage that are instrumented and built in a way they're far more chunkier in the way the content flows. They're different forms of content for the student to engage in, and they're focused on continuous formative assessment in terms of the way they're deployed.
Okay, so
I'm going too far, am I?
I'm going to have to move us along here.
Right, fair enough.
Welcome to the. I'm running behind as well, but let me shift over and put the spotlight on George. George, so we've, with your new Cengage product, Unlimited. You've doubtless suffered a lot of people trying to capture this. I just used the Netflix model. I could have gone all you can eat. Cengage has delivered a very interesting, a completely different business model to the market in the largest market for curriculum that we have, and so it'd be very curious to hear from you about that a little bit. There was two things I wanted to ask in particular was, can you tell us about the level of success the product had in year one and something about its demographics? Also, isolate, if you could, this problem of inclusive access that has been such an important one for broad adoption of digital products. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Sure, thanks. So let me take a step a little bit farther back. I won't take too much time, but to talk about kind of what brought Unlimited kind of front and center in our thought process. So about 6 years ago, kind of building on what Curtis and his team had started at Cengage, we really just changed the focus of Cengage to be not focused on the instructor and understanding that they're the customer, but pivoting to be, our job is to be the facilitator between the professor and the student. Put a lot of research into students and what they're looking for and how they go about their life, and learned a lot about, it's not the school that I went to. It's a very different ecosystem that they are living in. So many students are working, and school has to fit in within their lives. So we spent a lot of time focusing on that engagement and building the right kind of products that they would expect. And I completely agree with you. Technology it's not another modality. It's just part of the overall ecosystem that they expect. In that learning, what we really got to is content was too expensive. That we were in an unsustainable model that if you looked at the vast majority of students in the United States, they're not up in the Northeast in very expensive schools. They're in the heartland of the United States, and I forget who put this study out, but 45% of all students, their content was 50% of their costs for their education. That hit us that this is unsustainable, that we have seen market declines. We've seen the market declines of publishers from a top line perspective, but not as much of a decline in enrollment. So they are going somewhere else. Other things are solving these problems. So how can we meet them where they are? And that's where we looked at, how do students want to buy? and as we spent a lot of time with students and worked through the students, that the ecosystem was too complicated. That the idea of having to get an access code and making sure I buy this ISBN and this professor has switched from this edition to that edition, and calculus hasn't changed in 300 years. So this idea of these editions were a self-serving facility that the publishing industry had pushed forward. And content should be current, but this idea of this change needs to change. So what we decided to do is actually, it was modeled off of Netflix, so I appreciate that recognition. So the idea was, how do we make this simpler? How do we make this a process where a student just buys access? And I think one of the biggest misconceptions of the industry is it's a product. Many, many professors say, I want to adopt Cengage Unlimited. And you can't adopt Cengage Unlimited. Cengage Unlimited is a way for a student to transact with Cengage. That we still allow you to buy a book, buy an access code, buy it the a la carte way, or for $119, you get access to everything. And if you picked the wrong thing off the shelf, then delete it and pick the right thing. And if your professor wants to use multiple books, you don't have to buy multiple books. You have access to everything that's in the ecosystem. And so for us, so to talk about the success and answer that question right, so it's been, in our mind, very successful. We launched it in September, and we have about 1.5 million subscribers to date. We've saved $60 million for students to date, and we will surpass $100 million by September. So from an affordability perspective, we feel it's very successful. From a adoption, students love it. Our Net Promoter Score, which in an industry of mostly negative numbers, has moved into the positive numbers from students. And what we found is they really like the way, this is what they're used to. This is how they buy music. This is how they buy videos. This is how they look at it. It's all about a value proposition. I think one interesting number is 23% of our students who bought Cengage Unlimited could have bought what they used cheaper. And so what they found is that the modality was worth it, and the other things that you get as part of Unlimited, that other services that we add into the subscription, is what they're looking for. And we have lots of examples of students saying, look, I want to have access. I'm thinking about becoming an economics major. I decided to spend the extra $20 for Unlimited because I want to have access to this huge portfolio of content in economics because I think I want to go there. Right now I'm just a freshman and I get my access codes with Unlimited, but I also get access to everything else. So then from an inclusive access, that's another big misconception, is that we still have a huge inclusive access business at Cengage, and it's growing. We have a Cengage Unlimited institutional business, and then we have a Cengage Unlimited business. And those three businesses work very well together. So the inclusive access is what the industry has kind of used, and if what you're looking for is to try to get the cost of the content of that course put into the model where the student has it at day one, that's great. If you want if a school, and we have a lot of institutions who are now coming to us saying, we're going to buy Unlimited license for all of our freshmen. And what we've done is that now instead of professors having to decide what they're going to use, which edition they're going to use, where they're going to use inside of our ecosystem, they just have access. So now you have 25,000 textbooks, you have 1,000 different course solutions, and all sorts of other ancillary tools in that piece, and you can make a latent decision of what you want to use. So the institutions are saying, hey, let's buy it for freshmen, or a department is saying, let's buy it for all the business school, and then allow those decisions of what exactly we're going to use happen just in time, and also change throughout that student's career. Also, we allow students to, if you're in an inclusive access, and we have lots of examples of a class where a student has taken inclusive access, and then when they go to look to buy the next class, they can upgrade to Unlimited. So we now say, for us, again, Unlimited is just a commercial model for students. It's the way we think that they should buy. We think it's a way for us to create a more lasting relationship with those students and help them with their 100-year learning career as we go forward, to really learn about those students, understand where they're going. And a Cengage Unlimited license, subscription, is for the student. If a school buys a license for their freshman and the freshman transfers, it goes with that student. This is something the student has decided how to interact with Cengage and how we want to maintain that long-term relationship.
Very, very helpful. So, Melissa, in my remarks earlier, I made the comment about the early industry being sort of course denominated and focused in the LMS. And we kind of went from a course management system to a learning management system, and I don't know that there was much engineering change. I think it was more marketing change, for the industry. But I made the comment that more program focus. I've noticed in recent acquisitions from Instructure, we've got Portfolium and Mastery Connect, and there was something on the corporate side that was
Practice.
So we've got some examples of things that are showing how Instructure is responding to trend in the market. Would love to hear a little bit more from you about your investment thesis on those.
Sure. So as you mentioned earlier, this transition from the course or a learning activity in a more traditional unit to a program has been, I think, coming for a while. The workplace and workforce preparedness initiatives that we've been seeing over the last even 10 years, where money's being invested, how we're highlighting the gaps of skills from K-12 to higher education and then from higher education into the workplace, has driven this question, I think, of what is a true learning unit, but more importantly, how do they connect and how are we ensuring a learning journey as opposed to an effective learning experience in a very traditional way. So Instructure's approach to this has been to perhaps make I don't want to call it a shift, but a bigger emphasis on the full journey. We've shifted our understanding of this to be from the first day of school to the last day of work, and that learning continuum needs to be a continuum. And this allows for key advantages to students, to the institutions, and then even to the employers. So in particular, if we look at the Portfolium acquisition, we see portfolios and Portfolium as a way to address student needs, to be able to collect and provide evidence around their experiences that they're gathering inside the class and outside of the class, truly up at that program level, if you want to think about that, and even beyond. We see this as a way for institutions to assess their ability to deliver that. How well are they thinking not just in isolation in a single class, but how well are they thinking about the whole student and how they're developing the whole student? And then we see this as important for employers because it gives them more meaningful ways to assess their potential employees and be able to understand the skills that are brought to the table, where the gaps may be, and where they want to be able to develop around those gaps. Mastery Connect acquisition was similar in approach. We see this as a way to, earlier in students' life cycle, right, in the K-12 experience, to be able to formatively assess students' performance on the skills. It's no longer how well did they do in a grade or how well did they do in a subject, but it's how well are they building those skills, and the ability to assess that as those skills are being presented to the students and they're working through them, allows for, once again, the students to be able to understand and demonstrate their capabilities and identify where those gaps for the students might be. It's a way for the institutions to be able to identify where are the gaps in what we're delivering in the overall learning experience. And it's a way for either higher education institutions or even employers, depending on where those students choose to go next after their K-12 experience. It's a way for them to understand, once again, where those skills are and where those gaps are. So those two acquisitions were very similar. The practice acquisition, that was about 2 years ago, or maybe a little bit more than 2 years ago, and that was focused on, for those of you not aware of it, it's Practice XYZ was the company, or previous also known as ApprenNet. And its focus is on video exchange and feedback in that exchange, both personal reflection and collective peer reflection. And that was very similar if we think in the workplace. How do we help develop and make aware of where there are skills, where there are gaps, so that we can think about learning as that continuum?
Great. It's super helpful that you tied a lot of themes back together for us. So anyhow, so Jason, we just heard about workforce in my remarks, and I think we've all talked at some level about workforce as an investor. You've been looking at some companies that are emerging in this new workforce gap area. One in particular was immersion that I saw, but I'm curious about Talk to us a little bit about how you look at this arena and what help us understand what's state of the art in the workforce development kind of product area.
Sure, and Practice was one of our companies, which is why I answered that question too. So New Markets has been investing for about 15 years in education technology, and we've seen a tremendous change over that time period. We used to just invest in K-12 and higher ed, but we've gotten pulled into early learning and even to a greater degree in workforce in the last 3 years. You all probably know, because you guys are some of the best companies in the space, there are 8,000 education technology companies in the space right now that we're tracking. We look at about 400 a year in a pretty intense way, and we invest in about 4. So 1% acceptance rate among that small 400 that we look at. And over time, what we've definitely noticed the last few years is that this demand, software is eating the world. All jobs are tech jobs. All companies, no matter what those companies are in fact tech companies. No matter how analog you might think that food company is, everything has been digitized in their factory operations, in their distribution. And the same thing is also happening, albeit slower, to schools, hospitals, all the other sectors of the economy. And what's really fascinating for our world, I think, is that it's pulling all the way through the school system. So just a few years ago, 7 years ago, there were 30 states in the country that did not consider computer science to be a STEM course. It didn't even qualify as a STEM course. Computer science, that's crazy, right? So now, roll forward 7 years, now about 30 states have mandated that every single student take a computer science course in high school, and of course, it does count as a STEM course. But that digitization of the whole economy around us is pulling all the way through. So we see companies that are doing computer science in elementary school, quite a few of them actually, and in middle school and in high school, and it's less in elementary school, it's more in middle school, it's more in high school. I've seen kids coding in Python probably at some of your schools in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade now, which at first I thought that was completely crazy. Now I realize kids are very adept with languages. They get languages quite easily, and Python's just another language to them. So when you say workforce, Ray, and when you were talking about workforce related to instructor, which I think is very wise for all of you all to be thinking about workforce, it's not just training at companies. Workforce equals computer science in elementary school. Workforce equals a company like Nepris, which is connecting people at employer sites into schools to teach how, if you're learning about slopes, well, I'm someone who designs roller coasters for a living, and slopes are very important in my business because if the steepness of the slope is too much, all of the riders will vomit, but if it's not enough, it won't do the loop-de-loop the way it's supposed to. And the kids get a laugh out of that, and they find it interesting, and now suddenly what they're learning in school is connected to what is going to possibly happen in a job in the future. So the company Mersion, to circle all the way back, I'm usually the guy on the panels who's been kind of poo-pooing the virtual reality and the blockchain. That's a long ways away. Turns out, actually, now I have both a blockchain company and a virtual reality company in my portfolio because Credly now has a blockchain offering that's part of what they're offering to companies. And Mersion is a company that uses virtual reality. They are built on top of the Unity gaming platform. And they originally were in education schools. About 60 education schools around the country use Mersion as a simulator to train teachers before they go into the classroom. It was a little tiny business, just $1 million, $2 million in revenue, working with education schools. But then McKinsey found out about it and wanted to use it for leadership training. And Amazon found out about it and wanted to use it for remote manager training to give performance feedback at a distance. Before you knew it, they had more corporate customers than they did education customers. And Credly and Mersion are 2 examples of companies that are, both serving corporate sector and education sector in a unique blend that wouldn't have existed 5 years ago. So I'll pause there, but the workforce is coming to a school near you if it's already not there in a big way.
Yeah, very, very super helpful. And so, Jason, let me also just, I wanted to ask you to bridge us into a topic of kind of broadly, data science, analytics. You wrote in an article in EdSearch a couple of years ago, or a year ago or something, the statement that tech is transforming education from an art into a data-driven learning science. My question is, now that you've had a little more soak time on that, are you still a believer? Do you have some insight into companies that are in this space also that just are leading the way that you'd hold up to us?
Well, absolutely. I definitely believe that still, but the blending, it's like you're mentioning Michelangelo a while ago. It's the educators that can use the data that's being presented to them about which students are strong and weak, and group the right students together, or come up with the right project assignments for different students at different stages, and then the companies that can help them do that. So, Immersion is an example. Immersion is an emotional intelligence platform. It helps teachers get better at reading the room to figure out which students are kind of off task and not getting it, and which student, and classroom management, things of that sort, which are emotional intelligence skills. But those are highly instrumented skills within Immersion. So it's tracking the voice that you use, it's tracking kind of the state of each of the students, because it's a simulator. It needs to track all these details, and then it's presenting to you afterwards, kind of here's how you scored with that. And actually getting the score right is a really complicated problem, because you want it to be a formative assessment and a comfortable simulation experience, not a summative type assessment where you feel like you've failed the mission. And that's happening across all the education products we look at. I mean, you all know this, but there's like 3 phases of education products. The first is you create it for a small group of educators or students for limited use scenario, usually at the school level. Then you realize, we need to create some dashboards for it. You create some kind of weak visualizations of data, and then over time, those visualizations not only become better and better, they become the most important and differentiated part of your platform, and how you can charge more money to schools, because that's the value. So analytics companies, we invested in Civitas Learning and also in Starfish Retention in higher ed. Both of those, quite wide distribution, more than 20 million in revenue at this point. In K-12, we're really proud of our investment in Learn Platform, which is a great company that tracks usage of education technology in schools. It's EdTech effectiveness platform that's probably used by a lot of folks in the room. They're also a big member of IMS, believe in open standards. I would point to Schoolzilla as another leader in that area, not a company that we've invested in, but doing a great job helping school districts leverage data to actually achieve usefulness of that data. But honestly, in our database, there's 600 companies that are doing what we would consider data and analytics in education right now. It's a big sector, so I'm leaving out 596 other great companies.
Yeah. Wow, 596. It's a lot of companies in that space.
Yeah.
So let me just we'll ask one last question, a bit of a jump ball for the group here, but we just got a few minutes remaining on the panel here. But you're all involved in watching the standards organization, IMS, and watching the industry evolve, and we're all trying to help develop the same ecosystem. Are there ideas here or points of encouragement or focus areas about your strategy in working with the organization, what you're trying to encourage, or where you see that we can accelerate or improve the industry in this standards debate? Any thoughts about that, areas that we should focus our agenda in that area? Curtis, lead us off.
Maybe I'll kick us off a little bit and pull it back to this workforce theme. Pearson has been a strong supporter of IMS. I would say our track record on certainly getting certified against some of the standards is not as strong as I'd like it to be, in full candor. But I've been really delighted to see the organization move into the credentialing space, the common learner record space. These are the instruments that are going to bring us forward in this lifelong learning construct. One area I'd like to tie together connect some dots is a very strategic issue for us, which is around the skills mapping and how you do that at broad scale across many industries in a way that the currency of skill definition and how it applies to roles, but also how we work in that ecosystem, whether it's working with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or big employer associations to bring that together to create that currency.
Yeah, and I'd add, I completely agree. But I also think that we're all here for the learners. And if you're in a school, at a tech company, wherever we are, and I think we've been a huge supporter of the standards because we have to create a ecosystem that students make sense to them, that are easy to use, that they're not here to figure out our technology, they're here to learn. And so I think the standards bodies and us being very thoughtful in how all of our products work together so that they're not learning the technology, they're learning the subject.
I think to add on to that, and I think LTI Advantage is a good example of this, thinking about that learner experience needs to be central to the work that we do if it's about building an ecosystem. So with the learner record work and some of the other things, that's about data interoperability in a meaningful way, or language. How are things being referred to and translating? But when it comes to the experience that the student has in particular, I think the more depth we can go there, the better. LTI Advantage, by having the foundation of LTI, but then driving home the importance of the extensions and the deepness and richness and the types of engagements that students can have with multiple tools together, that drives, is really powerful. And so I continue to hope to see, I don't want to scare anybody when I say this, but more extensions that allow for a more meaningful user experience for the students, so it doesn't become about the technology, it becomes about the learning experience that we can then leverage into that workforce preparedness and life preparedness manner.
If I could add on to that,
You go right ahead.
my wish for the others of the platform and other large organizations out there is I think this next phase, and I wrote about this in the article last year, it is about which education technology companies will really become the platforms for the future ecosystem here, and it'll be the ones that open up their APIs, adopt standards, are driving the standards forward, kind of even getting ahead of the standards. There's 8,000 education technology products out there, and 638 are used in the average school district each month right now. So, the faster, more supplemental properties can plug into the Cengage all-you-can-eat model, or plug into Pearson and that distribution, or be fully embedded in Instructure with data passing that's really happening and really useful to the student and to the educator. Those are the companies that are going to win in the grand scheme of things. So you can, everybody up here, I want you to keep buying companies that I'm investing in, but I also want you to open up your APIs and be very standardized in how everybody else can plug into them, because that's, you can only acquire so many companies each year, but you can plug in a lot of companies if you build those APIs properly and open them up.
Yeah, super helpful. I'll also just add, I'll make one comment myself in this arena, and it's a bit more macro. Since there are some people who know that I'm returning to the board of directors at IMS, I've had a lot of folks that have come up and just offered a little unsolicited advice. There's one fairly common pattern there, which is recognition, particularly for vendors who, look, the lines between the markets are blurring. K-12 and higher ed isn't as distinct of a difference as it used to be. Higher ed and corporate isn't as distinct as it used to be. Those who want to do right by way of standards organizations and really try to adhere to that on behalf of their customers have more challenge in thinking about how to deploy their portfolio. And I think some of the educators face the same sorts of things. So I just note that I think that message is being heard, and we take that into planning within those organizations. So anyhow, well, I'd just like to ask everyone to help me in thanking this panel for today and the session. Nicely done.